I never expected that a massive citywide power outage and a leaky roof would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the universe works sometimes, isn't it? You spend years building a quiet, predictable life, a fortress of routine designed to keep you safe, and then a simple rainstorm comes along and washes it all away, leaving you standing in the wreckage, face to face with everything you never knew you wanted. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Owen. At the time, I was 27, working as a freelance copywriter from the meticulously organized confines of my one-bedroom apartment. My life was a series of comfortable, repeating loops. I'd wake up, make coffee, sit at my desk for 8 hours, maybe go to the building's gym in the evening, and then wind down with a book or a movie. It wasn't a bad life. It was just quiet, a kind of quiet that sometimes felt peaceful and other times felt a lot like loneliness. My building was a newer high-rise, one of those glass and steel structures that promised modern living. It had its perks, like the gym and a surprisingly lush rooftop garden that I frequented. It was my small patch of green in a concrete world. Mostly, though, it was filled with strangers, faces I'd nod to in the elevator, phantoms I'd hear through the walls. We were all living parallel lives, stacked on top of one another, but never really connecting. And then there was Liam. He lived 2 floors above me, in 14B. I didn't know his name at first, of course. To me, he was just 14B. He was the guy I'd see on the rooftop sometimes, tending to a small collection of herbs with a surprising gentleness in his large, capable-looking hands. He was the guy whose steady, rhythmic footsteps I'd sometimes hear on the treadmill next to mine in the gym. He was the guy who held the elevator for me once, offering a small, easy smile that made my stomach do a nervous little flip. He was, in a word, beautiful. Not in a delicate, sculpted way, but in a solid, grounded way. He looked like he was carved from oak. He had broad shoulders and arms that spoke of real, physical work, not just lifting weights in a climate-controlled room. His hair was a dark, unruly mess of curls, and when he smiled, his eyes crinkled at the corners. He had a kind of effortless confidence about him, the way he moved, the way he took up space in the world. To my cautious, observant mind, he was from another planet. A planet where people were self-assured and uncomplicated. He was the kind of guy I assumed had a pretty girlfriend, a group of loud friends he watched football with, and a life that was as straightforward and sturdy as he seemed to be. He was, in every sense, completely and utterly unattainable. And so, I did what I always do with things that feel out of reach. I admired him from a safe distance, cataloging our brief, meaningless interactions like a collector of rare stones. The nod in the hallway, the shared smile over a misbehaving sprinkler in the garden, the time our hands brushed as we both reached for the mailroom door. Each one was a tiny spark in the gray canvas of my routine. I never expected anything more. I was content, or so I told myself, to live in my quiet world, with him as just a pleasant part of the scenery. That was the state of things. Me, in my carefully controlled bubble, and him, a bright, warm presence just outside of it. It was a stable, predictable arrangement. But here's the thing about bubbles. They're fragile. It only takes one sharp shock to burst them. The storm that hit our city was one for the history books. It rolled in on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky turning a bruised shade of purple-gray. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the rain came down not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets that blurred the world outside my window into an impressionist painting. I love storms, usually. I loved the feeling of being safe and warm inside while nature raged. It reinforced the security of my little fortress. This time was different. The power grids across the city started to fail, one by one. Our building, being new, had a powerful generator that kicked in for essentials, the elevators, hallway lights, and one designated outlet in each apartment. It was enough to keep a lamp on and charge a phone, but the central air, the stove, the television, all of it went dead. The silence in the apartment was suddenly heavy, punctuated only by the drumming of the rain and the howl of the wind. I spent the first few hours in a state of mild, almost pleasant, disruption. I lit a few candles, their flickering light making my familiar living room seem mysterious and new. I read a book by the light of a battery-powered lantern, feeling a bit like a character in a post-apocalyptic novel. It was an adventure, a break from the norm. I had no idea that my real adventure was about to knock on my door. It was late, maybe around 9 o'clock, when I heard it. A firm, almost urgent knock. It was so out of place that for a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. No one ever knocked on my door. Packages were left outside, and any communication from building management came via email. I hesitated, my usual caution kicking in. But the knock came again, louder this time. I opened the door just a crack, the security chain still on. And there he was. Liam, 14B. He was standing in the dimly lit hallway, water dripping from his dark curls onto his shoulders. He was wearing a soaked t-shirt that clung to his chest and a pair of jeans that were dark with rain. He looked stressed, exhausted, and completely out of place. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said, his voice a little rough. He ran a hand through his wet hair, a gesture that seemed more anxious than casual. "This is a really weird question, but, are you having any leaks?" I shook my head. "No, everything's dry in here." "Why?" He let out a sigh that was pure frustration. "The roof must have taken some damage right above my unit. My ceiling, it's basically raining in my living room. Management says they can't get a repair crew out until this storm lets up, maybe not even until tomorrow morning. My whole apartment is a mess." He looked past me, into my dry, candlelit living room, with a kind of desperate longing. My heart did a painful little lurch of sympathy for him, and, I have to admit, a selfish, treacherous little flutter of opportunity. "That's awful," I said, and I meant it. "Is there anything I can do?" This was the moment. He looked down at his feet, then back up at me, his gaze direct and a little embarrassed. "This is going to sound crazy, and please, feel free to say no. But all the hotels nearby are booked up or without power. And I saw your light on. I was just wondering, could I maybe crash on your couch? Just for tonight. I swear I'll be no trouble at all. I'll be out of your hair first thing in the morning." My brain short-circuited. Liam. In my apartment. On my couch. The idea was so far outside the realm of possibility that I couldn't process it. All my carefully constructed walls, my safe distances, were about to be breached by the very person they were designed to protect me from. But looking at him, standing there soaked and weary, there was only one possible answer. All the reasons to say no, the awkwardness, the intrusion, the sheer, terrifying proximity to him, they all evaporated in the face of his simple, human need. "Of course," I heard myself say, my voice sounding surprisingly calm. I unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. "Come in. Don't worry about it." He gave me a look of such profound relief that it hit me right in the chest. "Seriously? Oh man. Thank you. You're a lifesaver." He stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and damp earth with him. He dripped onto my entryway rug, looking apologetic. "Sorry about the mess." "It's just water," I said, closing the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt impossibly significant. The storm raged outside, but inside my small, quiet apartment, a different kind of storm was just beginning. The first hour was a masterpiece of awkwardness. He was intensely aware of being an intruder, and I was intensely aware of, well, him. He stood dripping in my entryway while I fetched him a towel. He dried his hair, his movements efficient and strong, and I tried very hard not to stare at the way his muscles shifted under his damp t-shirt. I offered him a change of clothes, and he accepted a pair of my old sweatpants and a plain gray t-shirt. When he came out of my bathroom, dressed in my clothes, my breath caught in my throat. My sweatpants, which were loose on me, fit him perfectly, and the t-shirt stretched snugly across his broad chest. Seeing him in my clothes, in my apartment, felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't quite believe I was having. It was a level of domestic intimacy I was completely unprepared for. "Thanks," he said, running a hand over the soft cotton of the shirt. "This is much better. Don't worry about it," I replied, my voice a little tight. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I don't have much, with the power out, but I can probably put something together." He looked surprised, then grateful. "I haven't eaten since lunch." "I'd love that, if it's not too much trouble." It turned out to be the perfect icebreaker. We huddled in the kitchen, our shadows dancing on the walls in the flickering candlelight. I found some bread, cheese, and a few apples, and we made a simple meal of it. Sitting across from each other at my small dining table, the storm outside providing a constant, percussive soundtrack, we finally started to talk. Really talk. It wasn't profound at first. We talked about the building, the crazy weather, our jobs. I told him about being a copywriter, and he listened with genuine interest, asking smart questions about what I wrote. And then I asked him what he did. I'd always been curious. I'd seen him with sawdust on his jeans before, and I assumed he was in construction or something similar. "I'm a furniture maker," he said, and then he paused, correcting himself. "Well, I'm trying to be. Mostly I do custom carpentry to pay the bills. Decks, cabinets, that sort of thing. But what I really love is making art." That was the first crack in the facade. The confident, straightforward guy I had constructed in my head suddenly gained a new layer of complexity. "Art?" I asked, intrigued. He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing brightly in the darkroom. He scrolled through his photos and then turned the phone toward me. I leaned in, our shoulders almost touching, and looked. I was expecting to see a few well-made chairs or tables. What I saw stunned me. They were sculptures as much as furniture. A bookshelf that twisted and flowed like a living vine. A coffee table that looked like a cross-section of a fallen log, its rings impossibly intricate. A headboard carved with a whole forest scene. Each piece was breathtaking, a blend of raw nature and meticulous craftsmanship. "Liam, these are incredible," I breathed, looking up from the phone to his face. "You're a real artist." A faint blush colored his cheeks, visible even in the candlelight. "Thanks. It's hard, though, you know, trying to make a living off the thing you love. There's this constant voice in my head telling me to just stick to building decks, that it's safer, that I'm going to fail." And just like that, he wasn't the unattainable god from 14B anymore. He was a person with passions and insecurities and fears that sounded a lot like my own. He was worried about failing. He was vulnerable. It was a revelation that struck me deeper than his physical beauty ever had. It made him real. It made the air between us shift, becoming something warmer, something more charged. We kept talking for what felt like hours. He told me about growing up in a small town, about learning woodworking from his grandfather. I told him about my dream of writing a novel one day, a dream I had confessed to almost no one. We were two people, trapped by a storm, sharing secrets in the dark. At one point, the generator outside must have sputtered, because the single lamp I had on flickered wildly and then went out, plunging us into near total darkness, save for the candles. The sudden shift was jarring. In the abrupt silence, with just the sound of our breathing and the rain, he reached across the table, probably to steady the candle holder. At the exact same moment, I did the same. His fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't a lingering touch, just a brief, accidental grazing of skin. But it felt like an electric shock. A jolt of pure energy shot up my arm, and I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He pulled his back, too. The lamp flickered back on, and in its renewed, steady glow, I saw his eyes. They were wide, and he was looking at his hand, then at mine, with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it surprise? Confusion? Discomfort? The moment stretched, filled with 1,000 unspoken questions. The easy atmosphere of our conversation had vanished, replaced by a thick, humming tension. He cleared his throat, breaking the spell, and looked away. And I was left with the ghost of his touch on my skin, my heart hammering against my ribs. After that charged moment at the table, the easy flow of conversation never quite returned. We tidied up our simple meal in a careful, almost choreographed silence, each of us trying not to get too close to the other in the small kitchen. The air was thick with what we weren't saying. I was replaying the touch over and over in my mind, analyzing it, dissecting it, trying to convince myself it meant nothing while a desperate part of me hoped it meant everything. Finally, I took a deep breath and addressed the practical matter at hand. "Okay, let me get you some blankets and a pillow for the couch," I said, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet room. "Thanks, Owen," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips, spoken so softly, did strange things to my insides. I made up the couch for him, fluffing the pillow and laying out a thick comforter. He stood by, watching me with that same unreadable expression. When I was done, I turned to him. "There you go. I hope you'll be comfortable enough. The bathroom is just there if you need it. Let me know if you need anything else." "This is perfect," he said, his voice low. "Thank you again. For everything." "It's no problem," I insisted. "Get some sleep." I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, but leaving it slightly ajar. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed the reassurance that he was really there, that I hadn't imagined the whole evening. I got into bed, but sleep was a million miles away. My mind was a whirlwind. I could hear the faint sounds of him settling on the couch, the rustle of the blanket, the soft sigh as he lay down. Every sound was magnified, every creak of the couch a significant event. I lay there for hours, staring at my ceiling, my entire consciousness focused on the man sleeping in my living room. I thought about his hands, so strong and skilled. I thought about his confession of vulnerability, the fear of failure that mirrored my own. And I thought about that brief, electric touch in the dark. It was foolish, I knew, to build a fantasy on such a flimsy foundation, but I couldn't help it. Hope is a stubborn, irrational thing. I must have drifted off eventually, because I was startled awake by a soft sound from the living room. It was a groan of discomfort. I lay perfectly still, listening. Another rustle, another pained sigh. He was clearly not comfortable on my lumpy old couch. I felt a pang of guilt. Here I was, in my comfortable bed, while my guest, who I had offered shelter, was tossing and turning in pain just a few feet away. After a few more minutes of this, I heard his footsteps, soft on the floorboards. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. My heart started pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Was he leaving? Was he coming in? The door creaked open a little wider, and his silhouette appeared in the doorway, framed by the dim candlelight from the living room. "Owen," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Are you awake?" My own voice was thick with sleep and nerves. "Yeah. What's wrong? Is everything okay?" He stepped into the room, looking sheepish and apologetic. "I'm so sorry to bother you. Really. But my back is absolutely killing me on that couch. I think I'd be better off on a hard floor, honestly." He paused, as if gathering his courage. "This is going to sound weird, but you mind if I just camp out on your floor for the rest of the night? I won't make a sound." The request was so unexpected. Relief washed over me. He wasn't leaving. That was quickly followed by a fresh wave of anxiety. Him, sleeping in my room, on my floor, inches away from my bed. It was too much. It was exactly what I wanted. "No, of course not," I said, sitting up. "The floor is probably terrible too, though." "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said with a conviction that told me just how much pain he was in. "Anything is better than that couch." He disappeared for a moment and came back with his pillow. He laid it on the rug beside my bed and then stretched out on the floor, pulling a corner of his comforter over him. I lay back down in my bed, acutely aware of his presence so close by. The room was silent except for the sound of our breathing and the relentless rain outside. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. I was wide awake, my senses on high alert. I could hear every tiny shift he made, every breath he took. He was restless, sighing softly, unable to settle. The silence stretched, becoming heavier and heavier. I knew he wasn't sleeping, and he knew I wasn't either. Then, his voice came out of the darkness, quiet and hesitant. "This is gonna sound weird," he started, and my entire body tensed. "But I can't settle. After the leak, and the storm, and everything, my head is just spinning." His voice was strained, filled with a genuine distress that went beyond a sore back. My heart ached for him. Acting on an impulse I didn't know I possessed, I found myself speaking. "The floor can't be comfortable," I whispered into the dark. He was quiet for a long moment. "I thought maybe I had overstepped, said the wrong thing." I held my breath, waiting. Then, I heard him move. Not the sound of him shifting on the floor, but the sound of him getting up. My heart leaped into my throat. I watched his dark shape rise from the floor. He didn't head for the door or back to the couch. He walked to the side of my bed and just stood there, a tall shadow in the gloom. He left his spare pillow on the floor. It was a small, deliberate action that screamed with meaning. He looked at me, though I could barely make out his features. I understood what he was asking without him saying a word. I shifted over, making room, and lifted the edge of my comforter in silent invitation. He got into the bed, moving with a slow, deliberate grace, as if afraid a sudden movement would shatter the fragile tension between us. The mattress dipped with his weight. He lay on his back at first, on the very edge of the bed, a careful foot of space between us. The silence was back, but now it was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled to bursting with unspoken electricity. He let out a shaky breath and turned on his side, his back to me. I thought that would be it, that we would just lie there, in parallel, until morning. But then, after another long minute, he spoke again, his voice so low it was almost a thought. This is weird. Before I could ask what he meant, he rolled over, facing me this time. And then he moved, closing the small gap between us. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, and then he just rested his head on my chest. His arm came up, draping loosely across my stomach. My entire world stopped. Every rational thought flew out of my head. All that existed was the solid, surprising weight of him, the warmth of his body seeping through my t-shirt, the soft tickle of his hair against my chin, and the faint, clean scent of my soap on his skin. It wasn't a sexual gesture. There was nothing aggressive or demanding about it. It felt elemental, like a lost traveler finding a safe harbor in a storm. It was an act of pure, unadulterated trust and a search for comfort. My heart was going to beat its way out of my chest. I could feel its frantic rhythm against his ear. For a moment, I was paralyzed, terrified of doing the wrong thing. But then my own instincts took over. Slowly, tentatively, I raised my arm and wrapped it around his broad shoulders, pulling him just a little bit closer. The response was immediate. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of profound release, and seemed to melt against me. All the tension drained out of his body. His breathing deepened, evening out. Within minutes, he was asleep, and I lay there in the darkness, holding him, the storm raging outside my window, feeling more awake, more alive, and more terrified than I had ever felt in my entire life. Waking up the next morning was one of the most disorienting experiences of my life. For a fleeting, blissful moment, I was just aware of a comfortable warmth and weight against me. It felt right. It felt natural. Then my eyes fluttered open, and reality came crashing in. Liam was still there, his head on my chest, his arm thrown over me, our legs tangled together under the comforter. Sometime during the night, I had tightened my hold, my hand resting in the damp curls at the nape of his neck. We were intimately entwined, a position that spoke of familiarity and long-established affection, not of two virtual strangers who had just met. My heart began its familiar, anxious pounding. What did this mean? How would he react when he woke up? The sun was beginning to filter through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the room. The rain had stopped, and the silence was heavy. I watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his shoulders, and I was filled with a terrifying mix of emotions, a deep, aching tenderness and a gut-wrenching fear of the impending awkwardness. I didn't have to wait long. He stirred, a soft mumble escaping his lips. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the morning light. He looked confused for a second, and then his gaze focused on my face, so close to his. Awareness dawned, and it was like watching a switch flip. His body went rigid. He pulled away so quickly it was almost violent, scrambling to the edge of the bed as if it were on fire. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," he stammered, not looking at me. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. I don't know what. I was just so exhausted. "I'm sorry." He was off the bed in an instant, grabbing his clothes from where he'd left them on the floor. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The warm intimacy of the night had shattered, leaving behind a million sharp, cold pieces. "It's okay," I said, my voice sounding weak and hollow to my own ears. But it clearly wasn't. I should go check on my apartment," he said, already halfway to the door. "See what the damage looks like in the daylight." He was practically fleeing. He didn't even stop for the coffee I was about to offer. Within seconds, he was out of my bedroom, and a moment later, I heard the front door click shut. And then, silence. A profound, ringing silence that was so much heavier than the quiet I was used to. The space in the bed beside me felt impossibly empty, but the indentation of his head was still on the pillow, and the air still held the faint scent of him. He had left so abruptly, taking all the warmth and life from the room with him. I spent the rest of that day in a haze of miserable uncertainty. My apartment, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every object was a reminder of the night before. The couch he couldn't sleep on, the table where we'd shared a meal, the empty space on my floor where his pillow had been, and my bed felt enormous and lonely. My mind became a torture chamber of overanalysis. I replayed every second of the night, every word, every gesture. The way he'd looked at me after we touched hands. The vulnerability in his voice when he talked about his art. The desperate need for comfort when he came to my bed. And, most of all, his panic flight that morning. Did I misread everything? Was it really just about the storm and the stress and the exhaustion? Was his need for comfort purely platonic, a moment of human weakness that he was now deeply embarrassed by? Had I been a convenient, warm body in a moment of crisis? The thought was humiliating. Or was there something more? Was his panic not one of embarrassment, but of fear? Fear of what he had done, what he had felt, fear of his own impulses? This was the little spark of hope I clung to, the tiny ember I tried to fan into a flame. Maybe his reaction wasn't about me. Maybe it was about him. I kept expecting to hear from him. A text, a knock on the door to return my clothes. Anything. But the hours ticked by, and my phone remained silent. I saw him once from my window. He was talking to a man in a truck with a roofing company logo on the side. He looked up toward my apartment for a split second, then quickly looked away, as if he was afraid I might be watching. Which of course I was. The knot in my stomach tightened. Hope was fading, replaced by a dull, familiar ache of rejection. I had let my guard down, allowed myself to feel something, and this was the price. The fortress of my quiet life had been breached, and now I just felt exposed and foolish. By the time evening rolled around, I had resigned myself to the idea that I had imagined the whole connection. I decided I would just have to go back to pretending he was a stranger, nodding politely in the hallway and burying the memory of him sleeping in my arms so deep it could never hurt me again. Just as I was sinking into this bleak conclusion, another knock came at my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew, with absolute certainty, who it was. My hands were trembling as I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Liam. He stood there, dressed in his own clothes again, twisting his hands together. He looked just as nervous as I felt. I took a deep, shaky breath and opened the door. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. He was holding my folded sweatpants and t-shirt. "Just wanted to bring these back." "Thanks," I said, taking them from him. Our fingers brushed, and this time we both flinched. The air crackled between us. He didn't leave. He just stood there in my doorway, looking at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. I had to end it. I had to let him off the hook, let us both retreat to our corners. "Look, about last night," I started, aiming for a casual, breezy tone. "Don't even worry about it. You were stressed out. It's totally fine." He finally looked up at me, and his expression was pained. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's not fine. Can I come in for a second?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. I stepped back, letting him in, and closed the door behind him. He walked into the center of my living room, the same room that had felt so full with him in it, and now felt like a stage set for a drama. He turned to face me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Look," he began, his voice strained. "About last night and this morning. I need to explain. I acted like a total jerk, and I'm really sorry." I just waited, holding my breath. It wasn't what you think," he continued, struggling to find the words. "It wasn't just the storm or my back or the couch. I mean, all that was real. My apartment is a disaster." He let out a humorless little laugh. "But that's not why I came to your door. Not really." My brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand." He took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into deep water. "I've been noticing you for a while, Owen. Months, maybe. In the gym, on the roof. I noticed you." He finally met my gaze, and his eyes were filled with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "I wanted to talk to you, but I had no idea how. This is new territory for me. I've never felt this way about a guy before, and it scared the hell out of me. I figured you were straight, and I was just being crazy." The world tilted on its axis. Every assumption I had ever made about him, about myself, about the distance between us, was wrong. "So when the leak happened," he went on, his words coming faster now, a torrent of confession, "it felt like some kind of sign. It was a perfect excuse. A reason to knock on your door. A reason to talk to you. And you were so nice, so easy to be around. And last night on the couch, I couldn't stop thinking about you just being in the next room. And then in your bed, that wasn't about being uncomfortable, not really. I just wanted to be close to you. I acted on an impulse I've been fighting for months. I felt safe with you." He finally ran out of steam, his confession hanging in the air between us. "And then this morning," he finished softly, "I woke up and I panicked. It all felt too real, too fast. I freaked myself out. So I ran. And I've been kicking myself for it all day. I was stunned into silence, trying to process the beautiful, terrifying truth of what he was saying. He hadn't been repulsed. He'd been scared, just like me. All the anxiety, all the fear of rejection that had been poisoning me all day, it just dissolved. It was replaced by a dizzying, soaring hope. I finally found my voice. You thought I was straight? I asked, a small, incredulous laugh escaping me. He nodded, a shy, almost boyish look on his face. Yeah, I guess I just assumed. Liam, I said, taking a step closer to him. I've been noticing you too. For months. I thought you were the straight one. I thought you were completely out of my league. The relief that washed over his face was like watching the sun break through the clouds. It was breathtaking. A slow smile spread across his lips, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Really? He whispered. Really? I confirmed, my own smile finally breaking free. The tension between us didn't disappear. It transformed. It was no longer the sharp, anxious tension of uncertainty. It was the humming, magnetic tension of mutual desire, of a truth finally spoken aloud. He took a step closer, closing the remaining distance between us. He was so close now I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. So, he said, his voice dropping to a low, husky register that sent shivers down my spine. Can I maybe try something a little less weird this time? I didn't need to answer with words. I just nodded. He raised his hand, his fingers gently cupping my jaw. His touch was hesitant at first, questioning, and then it grew firm, confident. He tilted my head up slightly, his gaze searching mine, asking one final, silent question. I gave another small nod, and that was all the permission he needed. He leaned in and kissed me. And it was nothing like the chaste, comforting intimacy of the night before. This was a kiss of discovery, of intention, of months of unspoken longing finally being set free. It was gentle and questioning at first, then deepened as we both realized this was real, this was happening. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and relief and the promise of a new beginning. It was the end of the storm and the start of everything else. The weeks that followed that kiss were a blur of discovery. Liam's apartment was repaired within a few days, the hole in his ceiling patched and painted, all evidence of the storm erased. But he rarely stayed there. My apartment, the one he had stumbled into seeking shelter, had somehow become his home base, too. He'd show up after work, smelling of sawdust and varnish, his smile lighting up my doorway, and my quiet, solitary space would transform into a place filled with laughter and warmth. We fell into a rhythm that felt both brand new and completely natural. We went on actual dates, exploring parts of the city I had only ever walked through alone. We went to movies and sat in the back, his hand finding mine in the dark. We spent hours at his workshop, a chaotic, wonderful space on the industrial side of town. I'd watch him work, mesmerized by the way he could turn a rough piece of timber into something graceful and alive. He'd talk about the grain of the wood, the personality of each piece, and I realized his art wasn't just a job. It was the language he used to speak to the world. In turn, he would sit on my couch while I worked, reading over my shoulder and offering encouragement. He became the first person to read the opening chapters of the novel I had been too scared to show anyone. He didn't just say it was good. He pointed out lines he loved, asked questions about the characters, and made me feel, for the first time, like a real writer. We were learning each other's languages, discovering the hidden landscapes of each other's souls. There were, of course, moments of gentle awkwardness, the fumbling navigation that comes with any new relationship, especially one that was so new for him. But beneath it all was a foundation of honesty. We talked about his fears, about what it meant for him to be with a man for the first time. And I talked about my own history of caution, my habit of keeping the world at arm's length. That single night, born of a crisis, had stripped away all our pretenses, leaving us with a raw, vulnerable honesty that became the bedrock of our connection. Several months later, we were lying in my bed. It was late, and a soft, gentle rain was tapping against the window pane, a quiet echo of the storm that had brought us together. The sound was no longer ominous. It was soothing, a peaceful backdrop to our shared silence. Liam was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. Sometime during the night, he had rolled over, and without waking, had settled into that now familiar position. His head was resting on my chest, his arm draped across my stomach, his body tucked against mine. I lay there in the comfortable darkness, my arm wrapped around his shoulders, my fingers tracing lazy circles on his back. It was the same position we had found ourselves in on that first, terrifying night. But everything was different. There was no anxiety, no frantic heart pounding in my chest. There was no fear of the morning, no uncertainty about what this meant. There was only a profound sense of peace, a sense of rightness. The feeling of him against me was no longer a shocking, momentous event. It was the baseline. It was home. I looked at his face, relaxed in sleep, the hard lines of his jaw softened, his curls falling across his forehead, and I felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost overwhelmed me. Gratitude for a leaky roof, for a furious storm, for a moment of desperation that had led him to my door. It's strange, isn't it? How you can spend so much time and energy building walls to protect yourself from getting hurt, carefully curating a life of safety and predictability. You think you're keeping the bad things out, but most of the time, you're just keeping the good things from getting in. You think you need a fortress when what you really need is just an open door. Sometimes, the biggest storms in your life aren't there to break you. They're there to wash away all the barriers, all the fears, all the carefully constructed illusions you've been hiding behind. They come to clear a path, to show you what truly matters. Liam was my storm, and he was my harbor. And lying there, holding him while the gentle rain fell, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally, truly safe.